9.5 FM. Kaieteur Radio.
Guyana is now a full-fledged oil-producing nation. But how much do you know about this valuable yet finite resource? On our radio program, Guyana's Oil and You, we strike at the heart of every issue with informed views and credible data. The time is now for you to arm yourself with insightful knowledge on your oil wealth. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's episode of Guyana's Oil and You. I'm your hostess, senior journalist at Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilberg, and tonight we are discussing a very important topic to Guyana's role in the climate change fight. A critical aspect of our role in this fight has to do with the Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030. The draft of this document is currently part of a countrywide consultation process. But to help us understand what this document really stands for and many of its interesting aspects are three very interesting guests of ours. We have Ms. Pradeepa Bolnath, environmental economist and senior director for climate and REDD Plus at the Ministry of Natural Resources. Also joining her is Ms. Tracy Smith, Project Manager at the Department of Environment and Climate Change in the Office of the President. And with us as well is Mr. Paul Chung, Chairman of the Private Sector Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program and thank you for making the time to be here.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having us and giving us the space to speak about LCDS 2030.
Absolutely. Now, before we dive into some of the technicalities of what the Low Carbon Development Strategy really offers, I'd like to ask you, Ms. Bolnath, to start us off with just a brief overview as to what's the history of this document and how does this new report carry on that legacy?
Okay, thanks a lot for that question. You know, in many ways, as we craft the journey to 2030, we can only do so if we look to see what really led to the path that we are at right now, and then to be able to use that knowledge to chart the way forward. That journey started back in 2010 for Guyana, when the first low carbon development strategy was developed, was consulted, and was finalized and launched. Back in 2010, the vision for the role of forest in climate action was not as definitive as it is now. There was still a lot of science that had to be done, a lot of studies which had to be done, a lot of research which would have had to go into the UN process as well as forested countries' national processes. So there were so many unknowns at that time back in 2010. But one of the things we knew for sure in Guyana was that you can't have a climate solution and solve the climate change issue globally without addressing forests and maintaining forests. So starting from that undebatable standpoint, you know, that is one of the standpoints that remain the mainstay for the previous LCDS as well as this LCDS, that there can be no solution to climate change without addressing forests. So with that standpoint, back in 2010, the LCDS at that point in time focused on looking at ways in which we can harvest this vast resource that Guyana has to boast about. Close to 18 million hectares of forest, covering about 85% of our total country landscape. So that is the asset that we have to offer to the world as a part of the climate solution. So back in 2010, that was known, and that was the bedrock of everything that became part of the first LCDS. At that time, coinciding with the launch of the LCDS 2010, which focused heavily on balancing the environmental and the economic aspects of development. So developing the agriculture sector, developing the sectors that have to do with extractive resources like timber and mining, and everything that surrounds development from those perspectives, but doing so in a manner that is low carbon and that is environmentally friendly. So in a way, it is balancing what previously would have been thought of as competing objectives for development, fulfilling environmental objectives and fulfilling economic development goals. LCDS 2030, in essence, if one were to summarize, what really it's about is balancing the two sets of the objectives from the spheres of development from the economic side and development from the environmental side. That journey led us to the point where we're at right now, close to 1 decade after, where a lot of those answers which we didn't know at that point in time in 2010, the role of forests, how can this be part of climate action in a way that you can reduce that greenhouse gas which the forest really aims to reduce, which is carbon dioxide. A lot of those studies, a lot of those answers are now known. So we're at the point in time now where we're launching LCDS 2030 with two very important weapons in our arsenal. We know now a lot of the science backs up what initially back in 2010 really was just what we thought would have been the case. Now we know that. And the other weapon is that we have had so much buildup of experience and so much buildup of capabilities locally in Guyana, not only at governmental side, but at the community level, at the private sector level, to now take us forward to 2030 as we move forward on LCDS to 2030. So we are really happy that the journey has been a continuous one and one that hopefully would lead us to, in many ways, contribute to the global ambition of addressing climate action and being part of that solution.
So that is a really comprehensive picture that you've offered us there, tracking the work that's been done since 2010, bringing us forward now. But even as you know that we have two powerful weapons in our arsenal now, we also have the emergence of a very important sector. Now, I don't want to pay too much of our attention or spend too much of our time focusing on oil and gas, because the intention here is really to explain what is the backbone and the heart and soul of LCDS, and to get Guyanese to really understand our climate efforts and commitments. But we do have the emergence of the oil and gas sector. Now, how does LCDS 2030 balance us with this new dimension that's here?
Right, so I think in many ways the LCDS concept and the LCDS objective are even more important now than ever before. Mm-hmm. It's more important now than, to me, in my view, than it were back in 2010. So back in 2010, when we were talking about, as I mentioned earlier, balancing these, what could have been viewed by many as competing objectives, environmental objectives as well as economic objectives. Now that has been broadened in so many more ways with the oil and gas subsector coming into being. LCDS 2030 is crucial now for Guyana, because as we develop the oil and gas economy, and as we look towards all the other sectors which are existing, it underscores in an even more prominent way the importance of diversifying the economy to ensure that we do not fall into the trap of the Dutch disease and to be over-reliant on one sector just because it happens to be the momentary, receipt of all of the income, the sector that is going to bring in the biggest kind of earnings for Guyana, to not fall into that trap at the sake of other sectors, mm-hmm. which could be advanced and which could be strengthened. So I think LCDS 2030 right now is important because it looks, in the context of the oil and gas economy, it looks both at the demand and the supply side measures. So if I can just touch briefly on the demand side measures. The world as it stands right now is not at a state where it's ready to move away completely from fossil fuel. And that is the reality of the situation of the world over. And what we've seen are a couple of countries that have dominated that market in terms of supplying oil and gas. And really, in many ways, it's a monopoly because you have a few countries that have been consistently supplying that what has been maintained as a global demand. Guyana now is in a position to be part of that market. Being part of that market, however, does not mean to say that we would continue to have a vision of fossil fuel use at the same rate and at the same extent as it prevails now. In LCDS 2030, from the demand side, we've expressed clearly that Guyana will continue to advocate for a reduction in subsidies on fossil fuel so as to ensure that those economically competitive providers, those that can provide at a low carbon level, those are the ones that prevail as we move forward. So that it is not only about meeting the energy demands, but doing so in a way that is congruent with low carbon development. And secondly, we advocate strongly in LCDS 2030 for a global carbon tax, and for this to be implemented in a way that would allow for there to be a strengthened, stronger, and freer move towards clean and renewable energy. And on the supply side, we also stand firmly in ensuring that the environmental measures, so having aspects that would transition Guyana's economy to clean and renewable energy, that those aspects are advanced with the proceeds of LCDS. So the move towards an energy mix that will see hydro, natural gas, solar, and wind power dominate the grid-produced energy. And to use these as a way of not only transitioning the existing sectors that we have within country, but to provide new opportunities for new sectors as well. So as natural gas is seen as a temporary solution because it's clean but not renewable, solar, wind, and hydro are clean and renewable, and those are seen as the longer term solution towards an energy mix that will transition Guyana to a point where there would be by 2027, a significant move away from grid-produced energy towards clean and renewable energy, close to 70% move from where we're currently at right now. So LCDS 2030, in essence, takes on the oil and gas sector frontally because what we intend to do and what the objective is to allow for there to be that continued vision of balancing the economics and the environmental side. Whether it will be without challenges, I'm certain it would not be. But I think the task is in front of us to take on that challenge frontally and to provide the solutions that will pave the way for industry and government to advance low carbon development in the best way forward and the best way practical.
Thank you for that, Ms. Bolna. Now, just to pivot back to the backbone of LCDS, which you noted earlier that has to do with our forests. You simply cannot have a conversation about low carbon development without placing the spotlight on our forests. And we do have evidence that we can make money off of preserving our forests. And I think this is quite known or represented in the Guyana-Norway Partnership Agreement. So if you can just take us through a bit about what that agreement stands for, some of the key organs of it, how we were able to get money and what we've done with it. And I'll follow up after that.
Okay, sure. So back in 2010, again, as we look at our journey close to 1 decade before where we are at right now, there wasn't a whole lot out there that really spoke to monetizing this resource which we have, outside of cutting logs and processing that into timber and added value and having gold and other extractives within the forest. There wasn't a lot of focus, and there wasn't any kind of existing arrangement that would allow for anything else but those goods to be monetized. So back in 2010, when the LCDS at that point in time came up with the proposal that there is this tremendous and valuable service that the forest is providing by just being there, by being conserved, by being preserved, by being maintained. And this service is one that is connected very closely with climate action and the climate change solution. And that is with regards to greenhouse gases. As we all know, one of the main reasons why we have, the climate problem is because of the prevalence of greenhouse gases, excesses of greenhouse gases within the atmosphere. What forests do is that one of the biggest contributors to the greenhouse gas problem, which is carbon dioxide, forests and trees take those in. So as we learn in school, in primary school and secondary school, the process of photosynthesis, where trees take in carbon dioxide, by that very function, it helps to be part of the climate solution. So you can just think in your minds of 18 million hectares of forest maintained over decades of utilization to a point where 99% of those forests have remained intact as they were for decades, perhaps even centuries. And those forests continue to provide that function of taking in the carbon dioxide. It takes it in and it stores it. And by doing so, it is providing that service to the world where there is so much excess of CO2, as we call it out there. So in terms of numbers, which is where, that 10-year of work at the level of various institutions within Guyana help to establish, the forests every year take in approximately 154 million tons of CO2 just by the process of photosynthesis. And the forest stores 19.6 billion tons of carbon just by being conserved and being in a stable state. So that is a service that prior to 2010, no one was looking to value. But that service was saving people's lives, just by the forest being there and by existing. So LCDS 2030 helped to shine a light on that service and to show the connectivity of that service with the global climate solution. The government of Norway at that time collaborated with Guyana in what really was an ambitious bilateral program that saw national scale action. That program led to close to 220 million being earned by Guyana over the period 2010 to 2015. That allowed and in a way reflected the monetizing of that function, that storage function, that storage of carbon dioxide function. And that continued, the technical term we use for the continuous taking in is sequestration. So the continuous sequestering of carbon within those trees. Norway paid for that service, and we earned 220 million over 2010 to 2015. Those resources went to a number of programs. It went to programs that helped to create a project that is called the Micro and Small Enterprise Project, over 2,000 jobs, of which close to 60% went to women. We also saw programs like the Amerindian Development Fund, where 180 communities benefited from financing of community development programs within the areas that they work. We also saw the land titling program, the Amerindian land titling program, being advanced. And we saw as well two projects that are currently being implemented, one that is focused on building ICT hubs at 200 communities across Guyana. And another one which recently has kicked off, which is establishing the first utility-scale solar project that is going to be connected to the Demerara Berbice interconnectivity system. So those projects really are the core of LCDS. So in a sense, the cycle is complete where the science meets the economics. Mm-hmm. So the forests provide a function that is valued. That value goes towards financing low carbon initiatives that then help to circle back and provide that impetus for more low carbon development activities. So in a way, the circle is complete of low carbon development from the point of earning to the point of performing. And in a sense, that's the story. That is how it really circles back to where we are right now.
Are we looking to renew that type of arrangement?
Right. So 10 years ago, when there wasn't, I would say, a lot of ambitious partners, corporate partners, government partners out there, there were just a few. The government of Norway was one of those who were looking to have these programs show performance at national scale. Mm. The intention at that time, and this is laid out in the first LCDS, was for bilaterals to never be the sustained future for the monetizing of forest carbon. It was always intended to go towards a market-based mechanism where there are multiple buyers of the service. Because truly it can't be sustainable if there is only one buyer, whether it's a sovereign or whether it's one corporate buyer who wants to invest. So the intention always, and in the first LCDS, we had targeted a timeline of 2020 to move beyond the bilaterals and to move towards a market-based mechanism. So right now, there are a lot of countries, Norway being one of them, that are heavily invested in the voluntary carbon market. So to provide that mechanism where Norway will buy, other countries will buy as well, and a lot of private sector stakeholders will buy. So we see now a lot of global partners like Unilever. We see companies that are invested, Amazon.com. We see GSK. A lot of global brands now are investing in the global climate market. Not because they're required to do so, but because they have joined the corporate ambition of the UN, in meeting those climate targets. So the next stage of our journey wouldn't be a bilateral or a multilateral. It would be engaging in the market. And that is where a lot of the countries now are focusing not only their own resources, but also the support to developing the mechanisms for a stable market, a market that will be predictable, a market that will be highly liquid, and one that will be fungible.
Thank you very much for that. Now, I'd like to turn the conversation to the private sector aspect, and we have Mr. Paul Chung here who can provide us with that perspective. Now, the LCDS, it provides this sort of visionary perspective on how Guyana is to go about the replacement of expensive polluting heavy fuel oil, and that's going to be replaced with a mix of renewable resources such as solar, hydro, and wind power. We also have the inclusion of gas, which is a non-renewable but less polluting than heavy fuel oil. Can you explain for us how the private sector sees LCDS 2030, and to what extent do you believe it's going to impact the GDP growth that is often spoken of?
Good evening. The private sector welcomes the LCDS 2030 and the consultation. We think it's important that everybody understand exactly what's happening and where the future lies in terms of low carbon. We believe that, understanding the document, the trees must be more valuable alive than dead, and because of the kind of services our country provide to the world, we must be compensated. Now, energy. We know heavy fuel oil and diesel, which not only Guyana, but most of the Caribbean countries get their energy from, is not only high pollutant, but it's also expensive. We've seen, we currently experience, not only seeing, but experiencing the drastic increase in fuel prices. And we believe that moving away to sustainable or renewable energy would provide a more stable price. It would actually bring down the price of energy. Guyana right now, our energy cost is about 32 cents per kilowatt. The average in the Caribbean is 33 cents. It ranges between 40. I think Trinidad is 6 cents. Suriname, I think, is 5 cents. But those are the extreme. But the majority of the countries, not only Guyana, but high energy costs. It affects businesses in a negative way. We have to compete daily with other products, and we want. Not only in Guyana, but if we try to export. So cheaper energy, which the renewable would give us, would go far away in helping us to be more competitive in the private sector. Guyana, as a country, we're primarily a primary product producing country. Most of our products we sell as primary products. With cheaper energy, we can move to more value-added products. I mean, we have many things. Rather than exporting logs, we can convert those logs. We can dry them and convert them into excellent furniture and export the furniture. It adds more value. And when we do that, we get more value. We create more jobs, and the economy would expand more. I mean, if things like bauxite. I mean, with cheaper energy, we can convert bauxite into aluminum. And so the sky is the limit in terms of for us in Guyana with cheaper energy. So moving away from HFO and diesel and those high polluting it not only help to protect the environment, but it also improves the business environment. It increase jobs, and it does well not only for the country's environment and the world environment, but also economically. It's a sound practice. So we're happy for that, and we support it fully.
And Mr. Chung, in terms of one of the phenomenons or challenges that comes with any country that pursues the economic development of oil and gas resources, we often hear about the dreaded Dutch disease. Do you think that it's even more important for us to ensure we move away from HFOs and the other high polluting fuel sources that you spoke about, moving away from this to ensure that the economy is insulated from shocks, protected from this dreaded disease, because we've seen the effects of it in just, if you look, at Venezuela, the case of Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. So if you could just share your take on that for us.
Yeah, well, I mean, in primary school again, we learned you don't put all your eggs in one basket. If it falls down, I mean, you're in serious trouble. We've seen, for countries that just focus on oil, when, oil prices are volatile. And, sometimes, like today, it's up, then, only probably a year or two ago, they were paying you to buy oil because it was in a negative position. So it shows, the volatility. So what we need to, that's why a strategy is important. And that's why this LCDS strategy is extremely important. So you can plan properly, and then you can implement your plans, and so you have a focused way in which you operate. So the high dependence on oil, we need to move towards the sustainable part of the economy and move away from that. And this is something that is in the document and it's been practiced, because we need to develop our agriculture sector. Those are the sustainable agro-processing. I spoke about the harvesting the forest resources in a sustainable way, low impact mining. We need to develop industries that would go on, and oil is a depletable resource.
Yes.
Right, and so you can't put, we've seen what happened in Trinidad. Oil is not there in the amount that they had previously. And the struggle for foreign currency and a whole other set of stuff. But so you have to plan properly and implement. So the sustainable part of our economy, building the farm to market road, and ensuring that agriculture, the cost of agriculture, products are reduced, because you don't want, the people can get to their farms easier, can bring out their product products, properly, and that it's not damaged through transporting and so on. So, and the agro processing, we dump a lot of stuff here right now because, the cost of high energy, I think, is one of the reasons. Once we get cheaper energy, we can convert those things into products that we can not only use here in Guyana, but can export further afield. All of those things are very important that we should embrace going forward.
Thank you very much for your perspective, sir. And now I'd like to turn the spotlight on Miss Smith. She, I'm positive, has a really good insight to offer us here on LCDS as well. And without further ado, Miss Smith, I'd just like to ask you if you can speak to the importance of Guyana's position when it comes to the fight against climate change. If you can just provide for us some reflections on how we have been affected and perhaps some of the national and international commitments that we are expected to subscribe to.
Thank you. So it's very important to know as well that our government is focusing keenly on this transition to a low carbon economy. And we're trying to ensure as much as possible that this transition is a strong one for us. Since joining the UNFCCC in 1992, we have made sure that all of our national policies are streamlined in that direction. And since we've had the second submission of our national communications to the UNFCCC, that's the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, we have, our findings have shown that the greenhouse gas inventory actually shows that Guyana is a net carbon sink for our greenhouse gas removals. And we would like for that to maintain, to be that way. The LCDS has been praised internationally as well for being one of the first low carbon models being established at that time in 2010. And we'd like to build on and continue those sort of initiatives even now towards 2030 and beyond. And even further to that, Guyana has even signed on to over 200 of the multilateral environmental agreements that focus not only on climate change but other environmental issues that arise as well. Most recently at the COP26 last year, Guyana would have signed on to our global ocean policy, and that basically protects 30% of our oceans and also our marine life by 2030. We've also signed on to the Leaders' Nature Pledge, and that focuses as well on committing to take action in reversing the biodiversity loss. For the LCDS 2030, and even in those iterations that we've had before, we've had plans in place for that. But specifically for this LCDS 2030, the plans that we've included are to ensure climate resilient agriculture, to ensure climate risk assessment and insurance. And the Ministry of Agriculture, they've streamlined much of their work program now to ensure that vision is established. They're working now to ensure that we have climate risk insurance in place as well. We've had plans for coastal infrastructure. We're also ensuring that there's the expansion of the mangrove program as well as a green grace solution for restoring our nature. So these things are not only encapsulated in our national efforts, but they're also encapsulated in the international efforts that we've signed on to. We've also ensured that we have drought and flood management plans as well ingrained in these in the LCDS 2030 and all of our national efforts too. For the national strategic plans that we have, all of those things will be streamlined to match those efforts highlighted and outlined in the LCDS 2030 too. We're also building these commitments and building on what we've established as well. Pradeep would have alluded to earlier with the forestry and the energy sector as well. So we're building on those efforts to make sure that we're heading towards carbon neutrality and to also ensure that we maintain our forest cover as well. So these are all of our plans that we've considered actually. And there are so many more plans too. And this is why we have the LCDS public consultations ongoing now. We want to hear from everybody else as well. We've been able to meet with quite a few agencies, quite a few NGOs, other organizations, to even individuals who have reached out to us through the Department of Environment and Climate Change and Office of the President. And many times would have signed on to our public consultations. We have outreaches already across the country in all of the regions and so on. And we're listening to everybody. We want to know how to improve what we're doing now, how to strengthen what we're doing now. I'll use this opportunity also for those who would like to hear more of our plans that we have to visit our low carbon development strategy website as well. And even feel free to share your feedback, whether it be formal or you can even call into our office and you can speak with us there as well to hear some more of our plans and to also tell us and share with us how you would like to see your Guyana for 2030.
Now, as you've noted, there's quite a few follow-ups I'd like to ask you, but there's one in particular I'd love to start with. You mentioned the term net carbon sink, and I know that it's a term that we hear quite a lot when we talk about low carbon development strategy. For our audience, can you give us a simple breakdown of what that means?
Yes. So our net carbon sinks, let's go back to the fact where we were saying a carbon sink is anything that actually absorbs more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere more than it releases. So that's what it is basically. Because of our forest cover that we have here in Guyana, we are able to store much more of our carbon dioxide, more than we release. So that's where we are at this moment. Pradeepa, I'd encourage you as well to add if there's anything else that you'd like to say.
Sure. So one thing that sets us apart in Guyana, I think, as compared to many of the other countries that are more into manufacturing and even more expansive extractive industries, the forest, because of its continuous nature of storing and sequestering carbon, would make us, by and large, even if we were to contemplate an expansion in the economy of the oil and gas sector, or of the mining sector, or of the forestry sector, with all of that increasing tenfold, we will still continue to be a net carbon sink.
Yes.
The reason for this, of course, is because 154 million tons, imagine that, 154 million tons of CO2 get taken out of the atmosphere every year because of the forest functioning. And over and on top of that, the forest is storing, because it's in a stable state, close to 19.6 gigatons of CO2. So even if one were to consider, let's say, a single FPSO that is currently producing, and you look at what the carbon emissions will be for that FPSO, approximately 2 million tons of CO2 annually. We have 154 million tons coming out of the atmosphere just by the forest being in a stable state. So if you have 5 FPSOs, 10 FPSOs, as many as, tenfold increase to that, the value of the forest far eclipses whatever would come from those levels. But what we remind ourselves within the LCDS, that is not to say that any kind of development should happen unchecked. All development should happen within the sphere of LCDS. So whether it is going to be something in mining, it should be low impact mining. If it's something in forestry, it should be reduced impact logging. If it is something in the oil and gas sector, it should be the best, most efficient technologies being utilized. So I think it's through those lens that the LCDS really pivots the developmental focus for Guyana. So to develop, but along a low carbon pathway, and to maintain our sink, which is our biggest natural capital.
Yeah. And our deforestation rates too are extremely low. It's not high at all. It's somewhere around 0.02% between that, right?
Yes. So the rate is that we've been able to boast for Guyana to have the second highest forest cover percentage in the world, where the rate of deforestation, as Tracy mentioned, has never exceeded 0.1%. So that by itself shows that across different policies, legislation, changes in sectoral dynamics, expansion and development of new sectors, the mainstay has been stable, low, flat deforestation rates, And deforestation, as many of the listeners would know, is a change of forest and forest loss. So that is maintained. That has been maintained to such a low level that sink that Tracy speaks to is maintained and assured over time.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting that you noted the aspect of the oil and gas sector and the emissions from the FPSO, Ms. Bolna, because there is a sort of discussion, debate, whatever you might want to call it, between environmentalists as well as those stakeholders in the oil and gas sector who believe that with the acceleration of oil and gas development, we might be exceeding our carbon budget. And that is actually not the case, as you explained. We actually have a carbon budget that allows us to fully develop all of our oil and gas resources, correct?
Absolutely. And the reason for that is, as we look at the various aspects of what an FPSO would involve, so if it's fugitive flaring, routine flaring, startup flaring, whatever would come in the commissioning phase, in the operation phase, and similar as well for when the natural gas plant would start to be established and be operational. The CO2 emissions from any of those, so 2 FPSOs, the natural gas plant, 5 FPSOs by 2027, would not come. You would need close to 20 years for those to be equal to 1 year of CO2 sequestration from the forest. So it's on average about 2 million tons of CO2 from every FPSO. So 154 million tons the forests take in every year just by functioning. This vast expanse of close to 18 million hectares of forest. So that is the value of that. So if we look at a unit-to-unit comparison, it's 154 million that is continuously sequestered or taken in, CO2 that is taken from the atmosphere within the function of the forest. And then we have the FPSOs, on average maybe 2 million tons of CO2 by its operation. So even if that were to be multiplied by to cater for additional FPSOs, and then to also add the natural gas plant, which would come on stream soon, all of that would not, if you line that up to 1 year of the function of the forest, you can't even, it's a fraction. It's a very minute fraction. But I just want to underscore the point that within all of that, we continue to emphasize that even though that is the case, there's still a big focus of LCDS 2030 to have the strong fundamentals of LCDS within the oil and gas sector. There should be limits to flaring, there should be aspects that encourage clean and efficient technology, and there should be strong global action that encourage the move away from fossil fuel. Because our future, our grandchildren, maybe our children's future, should not be one that is centralized on fossil fuel. That should be on clean and renewable energy. It is not our present scenario, but within the context of several generations into the future, it should be one that is oriented towards clean and renewable energy. So a strong global carbon tax and removal of subsidies in fossil fuel will continue to be our global positions that we advocate for. Because you can't just, shut your eyes to what the future really should be for our children. Because it should be one that provides a solution to climate action and that allows for you to be able to grow and not to have the dependence on fossil fuels. But our reality is that there is this resource that is here, and it is to the value of our people, what could be done for our economy, our private sector, but it should be done along a low carbon pathway. So I circle back to the point I made earlier, that to me now more than ever, the LCDS is important. It is important because it's the blueprint and it's the anchor for everything that will take us into the future, certainly towards 2030 and beyond. So it's going to chart our path there to ensure that we do not lose course for the fundamentals that really establish our path in 2010. Low carbon, environmentally sustainable practices, and one that can take on new sectors, expanded sectors, and new and emerging opportunities for the people as well. So I think within that context, we we always think of the LCDS as that blueprint.
Mhm.
Thank you very much for that clarity there, Ms. Polnott. Now, back to you, Ms. Smith. We have all seen, perhaps on an annual basis, the devastating impacts
Yeah.
of floods across the country. We've seen how it has resulted in our health budget skyrocketing. We've seen the social implications and the damage to the agricultural sector. How does LCDS prepare the way for us to strengthen the mitigation measures that are needed for the next few years?
Thanks. So we see that just building on that, on our vision and our objective, really and truly, for the LCDS and even for our country's development, it's definitely for us to transition towards that low carbon pathway to achieve carbon neutrality. And then when it comes to the issue of addressing the flooding, we have already took, or at least look into ensuring that we have public consultations. Just last month, we've started the public consultations for infrastructure development, and those areas will be for additional drainage and irrigation outlets in regions 2, 3, 5, and 6 as well. The funding from that is through our Norway partnership, and that's basically, we're going to be looking for additional drainage systems to be put in place as well. And the benefits and the spillover effects that we will have from that, having those things in place, are just phenomenal. It's going to impact not only our social or agricultural systems, not only our health systems, but also an improvement for our ecosystem as well. I'll let Pradeepa speak a little bit more about the funding aspect of these initiatives and the plans really for these large adaptation projects.
Okay.
Sure. So, coming back to the whole idea of the cyclical nature of the planning of the LCDS. So it's intended that as we monetize these resources that would come from, this service that the forest is providing, this capturing of CO2, that could enter in the space of the voluntary carbon market. So recall that early in the conversation, I mentioned that we're moving from a bilateral towards a market-based mechanism, where you have multiple buyers and multiple sellers, the true definition of what, a market really is about. So these services now could potentially be bought by multiple parties within the structure of a market framework that could potentially have very lucrative prices as the market matures over time. The intention is to have this move towards a cycle whereby we're offering this service to the world. The service is monetized in this marketplace. Those resources or earnings come back within the cycle and they fund the low carbon initiatives. So that is really what the vision of the LCDS circles back to. The fundamental is the service of the forest that is monetized to allow for the financing of the low carbon vision and the low carbon program to see reality in terms of implementation. So for example, if there is a project on, let's say one on climate resilient agriculture, which Tracy alluded to earlier, that can't, in many ways, a lot of the initial work would start in country, but some of these programs are so huge that there is only so much that countries can do with its own resources, whether or not there is the oil and gas sector functioning. So where the LCDS will come in is that as these resources, the forest carbon services, are monetized within the marketplace, some of those resources will go back into funding the LCDS programs. So climate resilient agriculture, low impact mining, reduce impact logging, helping to strengthen and implement programs at community level, at the Amerindian community level, at the level of protected areas. So it's really intended to bring it full circle. There is an asset that we have by virtue of the people of Guyana maintaining those assets over time. Those assets are monetized, and then the resources from those proceeds go back into financing the LCDS. So in a way, it's really bringing a kind of practicality, a kind of realism, and a kind of sustainability within low carbon development that I think are crucial to maintain low carbon development in the longer term. Because we can talk ad nauseum about, we have a vision for low carbon development. We would like to do all of these illustrious things. But unless there is real resources backing those programs, that is where that conversation would start and end, just as a concept. So the LCDS really positions the full spectrum of, as I mentioned earlier, the environmental aspects and the economic aspects. And to bring these two together, to have the service of the environment bring resources to finance the sustainability of those very services. So in a way, bringing it back full circle.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bona. This brings us to the concluding aspect of our program this evening. And to close us off, I'd like to ask each of you to provide us with key takeaways you would want each citizen listening and watching us on Facebook Live, YouTube, to really remember about this document. What are some key takeaways? Mr. Chung, I'd like to start with you, and then we'll move to Ms. Smith.
Yeah, well, as I said, this is a very important document, and every single Guyanese should try to get a copy or go online and read it and understand, because it would affect our everyday life. And this is about our future. This is the way. So we all have to participate in line with the strategy, whatever we do, whether it's business or regular day-to-day life. It's important we understand the strategy and we stick with it, or we comment on it as it's in for consultation right now.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Smith?
Thank you. I'd like to stress on the importance of having that low carbon development strategy completely understood. And I know when it relates to the youth, many times much of these complex jargon and complex documents, it can go over their head. But one of our strongest programs that we're even working on too is working on ensuring that low carbon development strategy is even mainstreamed across all of our programs, our educational programs. We're currently working on ensuring that we have material and content available on the learning channels, mainstreaming it into our syllabuses and so on, and to ensure that we have continuous programs even on the radio like these ones here, where we can put the information from the LCDS in bite size for the younger population, for those who are more just want to have the information on the go. How does it relate to them as well, things like that. So, and I'd also like to encourage persons to, for any questions at all that you may have about the low carbon development strategy, please don't be afraid to reach out to the Department of Environment and Climate Change. You can reach out to any one of us there in the team. You can reach out to Pradeepa, myself, or just call the office on 223-0975. We'll be happy to have a conversation with you, even if it's a bilateral meeting, even if it's a school talk that you would like to request or so. We'd always encourage things like that. So yes, thank you very much for having us on your station today.
Ms. Beaumont?
Sure. So I think a good way to end is just by underscoring that Guyana is such an extraordinary country. Many of us don't get the opportunity to see a lot of the forest resources. But it's so extraordinary that sometimes we lose sight of the value of what we really offer to the world. And Guyana's place in the world is so important because of the forests that we've maintained across several decades of utilization by communities, by the private sector, work that is ongoing by government. And I think now is a time that we need to position this asset in a way that allow us to see the value of it to the environment, but also the value of it to the economy. And perhaps in an overarching way, the value of this to the global objective that is set in terms of climate action and climate goals. So I'll just close by saying that oftentimes even, within our technical team, we get consumed by the day-to-day doldrum of the technical aspects of what we do. And oftentimes we have to give ourselves that jolt that, Guyana is extraordinary, and the value of this resource really needs to be front and center to everything that we do and think about. And LCDS 2030 really underscores that in a way and positions that in a manner that shows how development can take place and retain this extraordinary feature of ours. 99% of forest cover maintained over time, and 85% of our country covered in forest, sequestering such an invaluable service to the world.
Thank you, Ms. Bolnard. And I really take the point that you made there about how extraordinary this country is. And really and truly, there are many times that we get caught up in what are the challenges that we're facing, trying to find the solutions, and we forget the value of what we actually have. And so on that note, I'd like to thank each of you for taking the time to be part of this very enlightening discussion. I do hope that we can have you back in the future for us to continue the conversation on Guyana's role in the fight against climate change, because it is an important discussion that needs to be so continuous, because as oil and gas really takes over, as Pradeepa said quite earlier, it is even more important for us to continue that very important conversation on protecting our forests, on placing a value on our biodiversity assets, and really having that sort of inclusive discussion on our future and where we're going to go as a low carbon economy. So with that said, I'd like to thank you again for being part of the program. Thank you to our audience for always being attentive, and we do look forward to having you next week with us, same time, same place. Please continue to be safe and do have a wonderful evening. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Kaieteur Radio.
Covering Guyana from coast to coast.
Demerara and Essequibo 99.1 FM.
Berbice 99.5 FM. Kaieteur Radio.
Celebrate Easter with Digicel. Enjoy up to 50% discounts on selected smartphones in the month of April. Plus, get a free 30-day Prime bundle included with your purchase. Get the DL3 Pro for only $9,750 or the Samsung A035 with a free case and screen protector for just $32,000. Plus, enjoy a free 30-day Prime bundle with the best premium content on